Good evening, everyone. It looks like we have people coming in. We won't have a chat room, but we will have a Q&A box. And so you're welcome to introduce yourselves if you want to. Um, and I guess we'll go ahead. My name is Catherine Abdener, and I'm your host this evening, as well as the Education Director for the Watercolor Society of Oregon. And welcome to our first WSO Live. We're so excited that you're here, and we look forward to a great evening. We're thrilled to offer this opportunity for the WSO and regional art communities. And before I take care of some housekeeping details, I'd like to introduce you to our WSO president, who is Debbie Lloyd. I'm going to spotlight her for you. And there she is.
Well, good evening. Welcome. And we're so glad that you've joined us for this exciting new event. And I just want to let you know there's so many other exciting things about WSO. If you're not a member, you might not know. We have two conventions a year where we have a juror and we have an exhibition, we have classes, we have a demo by the juror. We even have a workshop for 3 or 4 days after the convention. Another thing that we have is critique groups that help you get together with maybe 8 to 12 other people and talk about your art and how you might improve it. We have, I know I'm talking fast here, but I'm excited about WSO. We have a DVD lending library that is absolutely free, and so you can borrow those. And one of the things I think is the best thing about WSO is that there's the camaraderie of artist friends, and there's no friend like an art friend. It's just wonderful. So thanks for being here this evening.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. Um, I'd also like to thank the team that has worked really hard to bring this webinar to you. That includes Dan Parrish, Alicia Whitman, Carol Putnam, Barb Sulak, Elizabeth Zimmerman, of course, Debbie Lloyd, and our artist tonight, Tess Myers. This is a one-way webinar, and you're automatically muted. From your individual screen, you can pin the speaker, and though I will have her spotlighted, please be aware that we are unable to address individual tech issues during the session. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be provided a link to the recording. You may use the Q&A box for questions, and I will do my best to keep up with those, interrupting our artist if we need to. And let's get to it. Let me introduce Tess for you. Oh, and I'm just reminded that at the end of Tess's presentation, we'll have 10 minutes for Q&A, and you can ask Tess directly your questions in the box. Introducing Tess, best known for her portraiture, Tess focuses on walking the line between highly realistic representation and loose abstraction. She endeavors to capture rich tangibility, stillness before movement, or simply the expression of a human caught at a juncture in time. Her subjects are often from her community, portrayed in moments of mundanity, warm intimacy, or sublime existence. She also enjoys painting landscapes and has a particular soft spot, as many of us do, for the mist and rain-soaked Pacific Northwest scenery. Currently, Tess teaches watercolor and portraiture at the Oregon Society of Artists, OSA, in Portland, and she delights in working with students of all backgrounds and experience levels. I'll be placing Tess's website and her Instagram handle for you all in the Q&A. I know you'll enjoy her demo. Welcome, Tess.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction. I didn't think about having someone read my bio aloud to me when I was actually writing it. So thank you. I don't think I've had that experience before. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I want to thank the WSO, everyone who has been aforementioned as well, everyone here, for inviting me to participate, particularly for this inaugural session, which is pretty exciting. And I also want to thank all of you for taking time out of your evenings to come watch and hang out with us. So I appreciate that. I'm going to get right to it. Let me give you a little bit of background about what to expect tonight. My goal tonight is to demonstrate a foundational technique from my style of portraiture, which is the creation, the control, and the layering of gradient shapes. And then I'm going to show you how I use these gradient shapes to represent shadows and contour on a face, which is to say, a portrait. I'll also talk a little bit about my approach to mixing skin tones, and we're certainly going to run into various sundry portrait-themed items as well. But I'm going to start out with an explanation and a little exercise demo that's going to show how I create those gradients. It's going to take me maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Since this webinar is going to be, or it is currently, being recorded, I do encourage you that if you want to follow along with this afterwards, if you want to just give it a try yourself, please do so. Many of you may already be familiar with making and mixing gradients. It may not feel like anything new, but I've been doing this with this technique for years and years, and I still warm up by practicing with those little gradient shapes. So I'll be doing a short demo just of that exercise. It's going to take, I think I said 10, 15 minutes. And then I'm going to actually finish a portrait. So let me switch my screen to the exciting stuff right here. Last night I started a portrait here. You can see there's a lot going on, but it's very unfinished. I've got the background stuff. I've got some flowers and whatnot. This is my friend's soul. And mostly what we're going to do is we're going to be finishing this out. The reason I'm showing the process of finishing a portrait is because all portraits, but watercolor portraits in particular, tend to go through really awkward phases. There'll be a point in which you're layering your transparent layers and you've got some contour in there and the eyes look really weird and the eyebrows aren't in yet. It just looks very strange. And I thought that since we don't have a whole lot of time tonight, rather than starting one and ending right in that middle awkward phase, maybe I would just bring a half-finished portrait and we would finish it together. So I'm not sure we're going to get all the way to the end. I tend to spend hours fiddling, making little boring edits to my portraits before I'm done with them. But I think we'll get through the bulk of it. And most importantly, I think that this is going to be, I hope that this is going to be a good way to see how I'm applying that really simple foundational technique. And just by applying it, I'm able to build out a full portrait. That's the idea. I'm going to get us started with our exercise first. So let's go here. I'm just wondering, Catherine, do we have any questions yet in our chat? We are doing Q&A at the end, but there's a chat box as well, I think. And so if you have anything that comes up along the way, you have any questions, you can type into that chat box, and I may not see it right away, but we'll be trying to collect what those big questions are.
We're good so far, Tess.
Awesome. I was reminded that people often ask about materials. The paper that I like to use is, wow, this is easy to see. Is Winsor & Newton. Here we go. I like this. I like to use watercolor blocks. It's very easy. You just rip the sheet off the top and you have a new one. This is the 100% cotton, 300 grams per square meter, 140 lib, the usual stuff. I like this stuff a lot. This is cold press. It's a nice blend of a little bit of texture, but not too much for me. So that's mostly what I use for my portraits. I'll use arches for bigger work as well. Alrighty, so let's see. I think I got through. I'm looking at my notes. Don't tell anyone. Okay, so why am I using gradients? Watercolor as a medium probably has the greatest range of any medium that I have used before. I won't say I have extensive experience in all kinds of mediums, but it always surprises me the range of marks that you can make with watercolor. You can have beautifully soft, delicate effects. You can get very smooth transitions like I'm going to show tonight. You can also get hard lines. You can get bold and saturated colors as well. And then you get all that cool serendipitous stuff like burns or back runs. You get fringy fern-like bleeds. You get granulation. You get unexpected stuff. And that just sheer range has always really impressed me. I'm not going to try to sell you on watercolor. I think that we're all here because we really, really like it. But I just did want to say that this is just one of many, many, many different ways to use watercolor. And it has its idiosyncrasies. Sometimes the behavior of watercolor may feel complex or completely bewildering. Um, Speaking for myself anyway, there are some techniques that are more easily controlled, dry brushing, single color glazing, and then there are some that tend to be completely unpredictable, which is often the point of that technique. I will say that generally speaking, in my experience, the more water you have, the more water you are using with the effect that you're going for, the harder it gets to predict what happens when your brush actually meets that paper. More water, more chaos, more unknowns. An unknown isn't necessarily a bad thing. The technique that I'm showing today is it relies almost entirely on using just the right amount of water. So that's going to be a focus here is on knowing exactly how much water do we have on our paper for the shape that we're working in, and how much is on our brush, how much pigment is on our brush. Those are the main key points of being able to control and predict gradient behavior. You have almost certainly used gradients before. You may have found them to be intuitive and easy, or you may have found them so frustrating that you wanted to eat your own paintbrush. And I will not be taking questions on the teeth marks on my brushes. So this is all to say, I like to break complex things down into digestible pieces. So tonight we're going to take a complex system of water and pigment, and we're going to figure out what really makes those smooth and easy gradients smooth and easy to control. Right off, I can tell you that there's three rules for a gradient. You need the right amount of moisture. I will elaborate on these. The right amount of moisture. You need the right amount of pigment. And then the most important one, you have to not mess with it. Sit on your hands if you need to. Go take a walk, but you can't mess with it. You have to let the drying process and the diffusion work. Let's see what that looks like. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, what is a gradient? A gradient is a smooth transition, either from one value to another, or from one color to another, sometimes both. So think about, the last time you painted a really smooth sky that went from light to dark. That was probably a gradient. Any of those smooth transitions I would call a gradient. And watercolor happens to be spectacular at making gradients. Okay, let's get some actual paint out. I am using more questions about materials. I'm using, in this case, a size 0 Isabie squirrel mop brush. I like this brush a lot. I do probably 80% of my work with it. Not the fine detailed stuff, but anytime I'm trying to get a good amount of water on the paper, I'll use a mop brush. This is my small mop brush. This is a bigger mop brush. I'll mostly be using this one tonight. And I'll try to introduce my smaller brushes as I go. The pigments that I'm going to be using, I might as well introduce you to my favorite palette right now. This is the palette I use most often when I am teaching. Not because you can, these are the best colors, or that because you can only make portraits with these colors, or you can only use these colors to make portraits, but because they play really nicely together and they take a lot of complexity out. So I like phthalocyan blue, quinacridone red. Often I use gamboge. Tonight for yellow, I'm going to be using nickel quinacridone gold. And then Payne's gray is often another one that I use as a darkener. You may have heard of a CMYK palette. This is something that printers figured out because they're very smart. And that is that if you want to have really pure tones, if you want to mix your secondary tones, your secondary colors like your oranges, your greens, your purples, and you want those to be really, really pure, you are actually not mixing red, blue, and yellow. You're mixing cyan, magenta, and yellow. The K in CMYK stands for key. It just means a dark value. So what I have here is basically a CMYK palette, and I'm going to be focusing on using these three colors. I should just take gamboge out because we're using nickel quinacridone gold. This is a yellow. I found many yellows work for yellow, but we have more of a cyan color, a little bit teal. The quinacridone red is a little bit more of a magenta. It's kind of pinkish. I guess yellow is yellow. Uh, and I have found that I really like the colors that I get when I mix those together. Okie dokie. So I'm going to be using some of those colors, and let's find out how to make a gradient. Starting out with a light amount of, in this case, this is Payne's gray. I'm just going to make a shape. And the reason I'm using Payne's gray here is because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. And it turns out it's really, really tricky to see clear water on camera when you can't take a look at the paper yourself. So I'm just coloring this for the point of being able to see it. Let's talk about that rule number 1, moisture. When I put this right on the paper, you can see it's quite shiny. And if there's enough moisture, let's add a little bit more, you'll see that it's kind of runny. I call this a puddle. Anytime you have free moving water through your, I call this a wet working area. I'm not sure that's the best name for it, but that's what we're working with. Anytime you have that water freely moving, you're going to have a lot of chaos in your system. I'm going for the Goldilocks zone of moisture level, not a puddle, not soaking wet, but I want it to be saturated, which means that I'll just pick up any of that extra water here. I'm using a thirsty brush, which is to say it's clean, it's been dabbed off, and then I can just kind of pick up that little bit of extra moisture. And now, watch as I turn it in the light, you can see the texture of the paper. Take note, this is exactly what you're looking for. You want it to be shiny, fully all the way through, no dry spots, but you want to be able to see the texture of the paper. That means that we're now working through in a very thin film of water. So, this is a pretty flat shape here, but if I take some more concentrated pigment, like so, and I drop this in, let's use slightly less concentrated. I drop this into one end, then the powers of diffusion are going to start branching this pigment out into the shape, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So right there, that was rules 2 and 3 for our gradients. First rule was the amount of water. We want to have that saturated level. The second rule was how much pigment. And the answer is usually, if you're trying to make a smooth gradient, add more pigment than what you already have on the paper. And then rule 3, I'm gonna enact right now. I'm not gonna touch it. I'm gonna make another one just so we can kind of get a sense of the range. When doing this exercise, it's really it's a numbers thing. You want to make 20 of these rather than one perfect gradient. You want to get a sense for what it really feels like to hit just the right moisture level. I'm going to use a little bit of phthalo blue here. And you want to be able to practice that. I'm making these little teardrops. Sometimes in class, I'll have people make leaves, which can be fun. You can, if it's a fall day, you can go out and find yourself some leaves to appreciate. Step 1, control the moisture. Often I'll start with a little bit of a puddle, but then I'll just let it soak itself in to the paper. And you'll see that after just a few moments, I have now that zone that I'm looking for where it's quite shiny all through here, but I can still see the texture of the paper. Now, one thing that I'm hoping that you can see on the camera is that a very natural thing has happened, which is part of this shape is already starting to dry. There just wasn't very much water there. So a really important part of this technique is that I look at my shape and I make sure that everything is fully saturated just as I want it to be before I move on to the next step. Just like that. So now when I look at this and I tilt it around, I guess I'm helping out the diffusion a little bit on this side. I can see that I have that smooth surface, smooth and shiny evenly, but I can see the texture of the paper underneath. So I can drop in a little bit more concentrated than what I have here, but not by a ton. And you're going to see that often that will move a little bit faster. It's going to take some time. It's a lot like watching a photo develop, or even, shall I say, watching paint dry. But you have to just wait and give it enough time for your pigments to flow out. Let me move my light so you can see that without the glare. And even in just a few seconds, 30 seconds, that pigment has already moved. People at this stage, when they want a smooth gradient, I often see them kind of poke at it with a brush, which you can get away with to a certain point, but you'll start to get brush marks in there and you'll mess with that natural diffusion pattern. So a really key point of this particular exercise is sit on your hands, go take a walk, do whatever it is that you need to do to prevent yourself from messing with that. Here's two monochrome uh, shapes, gradients. What happens when we mix two colors in? Like so. So I've made my shape. I'm going to babysit it for a minute and look at it from the side and make sure that it's nice and shiny and there's not too much puddling going on. If you do see puddling, and you'll often see a little bit more of a puddle once you add that paint in, you've now added more water. So like you can see I've got a little bit of a puddle over here. You can either just gently slurp it up with that thirsty brush like that, or you can leave it and see what happens. Sometimes exciting stuff happens. Okay, back to this one. So I'm going to add two colors here. I'll add a little bit more of that phthalocyanin blue. And I'm just going to dab that into one end. A little bit more like that. Sort of, as one might not expect, generally, the more concentrated the paint that you add, the less far it goes. This is primarily because of the viscosity of paint. Paint is full of binders, gum arabic, stuff like that, honey in the case of the M-gram paints that I'm using. And that viscosity actually prevents the pigments from moving out. So this is another thing that you can just play with is how does changing the concentration of the paint that I'm adding change what happens in my gradient? And even more fun, more variables, what happens if I add another color, a completely different pigment? And so if I add some quinacridone red in here, now what's going to happen? That's a little bit of more dilute quinacridone red, and then here's a little bit of more concentrated quinacridone red. And we're just going to see what happens. I have a lot of water in this one. It's a little bit puddly. So we may end up, as I said, the more water that you have, the more chaos is in the system. So we may end up with some interesting effects. But ultimately, what you get when you do this is you tend to get smooth transitions from one color or value to another, even if it doesn't really look like it. Once the pigment has had that time to diffuse out, you'll if you trust in the process, if you believe in it, you will tend to see those smooth transitions. Now, you don't always see smooth transitions, of course. I'm sure all of us have been caught unawares with a burn or a cauliflower or a back run, whatever you call it. The back runs happen when a drying area meets a wet area, and that wet area is trying to flow into the drying area. And sometimes this is desirable. It's a really cool effect. And sometimes it is happening right in the middle of the face of the grandkid that you're trying to paint, and that's not what you want. So it's really good to know what conditions actually create that back run effect. I am waiting for this one to dry just enough that we that I'll be able to demonstrate how that back run is formed. But I think I'm gonna have to wait a moment more. So hang tight with me. Let's make another one of these. We'll use some different colors. I'm going to start off with a little bit of my quinacridone, nickel quinacridone gold. I don't actually have to start off with a color. I'm using color here because it is clearer to see. There wouldn't be much to see if I was just using clear water. But if you want to make a gradient that goes from totally dark or goes from dark to the white of the paper, then you can do that with a gradient. You just make that gradient with the clear water first. I'm gonna add in a little bit more of my Quin Gold, and then I'm gonna add in a little bit of my Quin Red. You'll notice that I'm using two quinacridones here, the red and the gold. I quite like how quinacridone pigments play with each other. Um, they tend to be very transparent, but not everyone's cup of tea. And why not? We're going to add a little bit of our third color in here just to see what happens. And we'll
Tess,
let
I
that
do have
go.
a question.
Yes.
Is your phthalo blue to the green shade or the blue shade or the red shade? Sorry.
Great question. So the M-gram phthalocyan blue is not um it's not listed as red or green. I have compared it to others, and I think I found that it's closest to the red shade. It's a little bit more on the blue side. I find that this works really well as a cyan. Okay, I think we are just right at a place where I can now ruin this one. So I'm going to come in with clear water, and this is the reason that I say you want to add water that is or add paint that's more concentrated than what you already have on your shape, which is that if you add clear water or something that is significantly less concentrated, let's see if I can get this burn to form. There we go. Then you risk disrupting the pigments that are already settled into the paper. And we're just gonna see if that goes or not. The thing with burns, you can set up all the conditions just right, and then sometimes they happen and sometimes they don't. Yeah, I can see a little bit of fringing right here on this edge. So we're gonna let these sit for a little while. You see that they've already developed a bit. And I'm gonna talk just a bit about another thing that gradients do that I really, really love. This is, let's move this a little bit further back. Here we go. This is a chart that I made, more or less a color study, that compares mixing versus layering or glazing versus mingling pigments. And these are the three pigments that I have been talking about, except I'm using gamboge here instead of quinacridone gold. You mix red and yellow, you get orange. You mix yellow and blue, you get green. You mix blue and red, you get purple. And these are all perfectly nice shades. They're very transparent. But I wanted to see like, of these three options here, when I look at them, I look at this row or the column of the mingled ones, and these to me really feel very bright. Let's give a little bit more light here. This is the most vibrant colors that to my eye. And this is something called optical mixing, which you get with gradients. This has been mixed on my palette and then applied to the paper. It's flat and perfectly nice color, but it's all the same color and the pigment is all pretty evenly distributed. With mingling here, we're ignoring the middle column for now. With mingling, where I'm doing more or less what I just did up here on this exercise, is I'm making a gradient and I'm just dropping in a bit of the pure unmixed pigment. And what you get is not a pure purple anywhere here. You don't get a pure, you get some very green tones. The whole shape is not pure green. You get some orange tones. The whole shape is not orange. But what you have instead is a variety of concentrations. And variety is, as they say, the spice of life. I would also say it is the spice of painting. When we have these colors that are mixed together really evenly, it just reads to us as one single color in our eyes. When we see these colors, let's look at this one here, a little easier to see. When we see these colors right next to each other, then we're seeing disparate populations where there's more yellow here, more blue here, and it changes as a gradient does across that shape. There's some science here. If you want to get really into the physics of it, there's some stuff about interference. When you have two similar colors, the wavelengths can interfere with each other. If they're bouncing off of things that are right next to each other, they can interfere with each other and actually reduce the vividness of that color. But when you have you have colored particles that are not quite right up next to each other, but say in sort of spread out a little bit, then you don't get that same kind of interference from the light waves. So in my opinion, I think that mingling like this, mingling the pure tones together, using a gradient can create some of the most vibrant and sparky feeling colors. And that's why I like to do this instead of mixing. Feel free to shoot any questions about that. I didn't really talk about the layering. let's talk about the layering real quick. Glazing does something really similar. And you can see that you'll end up with a lot of those. So there's a little bit more vibrancy and more variation in these colors as well. Personally, I find that mingling them all in one layer tends to give me the most vibrancy, but this sheet was intended to make a specific point. Okay, so we're gonna come back to this and just check in on these, and you can see, hopefully, let's move my, like that I am getting a bit of a burn right here. As that dries, it's going to get more obvious, but you can see I have these fringy effects where that smooth, that formerly smooth pigment has now been lifted up from the paper and been pushed around. In contrast, I have this one where it's barely a gradient. I would say it's darker here than at the tip. But it did blend out very smoothly. And then these shapes are still drying, but you can kind of get a sense for how we're transitioning smoothly from one color to another.
Tess,
Unless we have,
would you say that within the first teardrop there, that there was more water than you wish there had been? Or do you think that's what caused the burn, as you say?
I intentionally caused the burn. So
Okay.
after when it mostly dried. So once I stopped being able to see the um, this shine on the paper looks matte, but it's still cool to the touch and it's still buckled. That means there's still moisture in there, and that means that the sizing on the paper isn't going to prevent water from flowing into that area. So as soon as I found that really vulnerable zone of that half dry, and I added some clear water to it, that's what picked up those pigments and it moved it out. It's a really good question. But yes, so it absolutely does have everything to do with how much water is in the system and when you add it. And that was intended to be a demonstration to show how you can create a burn. I wouldn't say that this burn is particularly exciting looking, but here we are. Okay, I'm happy to take more questions about this, but otherwise I think I'm going to move on to showing like this is cool, but it's a bunch of teardrops. You guys came here for portrait demonstrations, so let's come back to my friend Sol here. And I hope what you'll recognize now is that ignore this. I added the background and the flowers because I wanted them to be done. But the whole of Sol's face, this whole base layer, is a gradient. It is a big gradient shape. I worked on this shape while it was wet, while it was inside um, that Goldilocks zone. I used a mister bottle like so, with lots of distance to very gently re-wet the area as needed until I was able to get all of those colors in. So if you want to see the process of this, I have recorded, I was doing another stream last night for Twitch, not for any other organization, but as a kind of as a practice run for myself. So this process is all recorded, and I will put a link to that YouTube video. Hopefully someone will remind me. I can put that in the chat at the end. So if you would like to, you can see the full process of this portrait from beginning to end. Um, the only other thing I want to say about this is you may or may not be able to see that there's a little bit of frisket still here. All these white areas right here, I mask off with a paintable masking fluid called frisket, or maybe just called art masking fluid. And I like to do that so I keep those white highlights clear. And then once I have gotten my full initial wash in and I don't have to worry about not painting one area or another, then I can peel off that frisket and I'm left with just the white highlights. Okay, let me put oops, my reference back up. Here we go. Can you see, everyone see the reference photo here? And my approach here
Excuse
is
me,
gonna,
Tess, before you start, a couple of
yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Do you slant your paper when you create gradients?
Fantastic question. Sometimes, if I want more time, if I want to work if I have like a lot of work I want to do in an area and I want to really get to that before things start to dry, then yes, what I'll often do is I'll tilt it like so, and then I've heard it called working a bead. It's where you have um, more or less like a bead of water, and you just kind of keep moving your front down as you go. And because that water is there, you don't have a hard edge formed. And it's a really good way to work a gradient as you go and just kind of move down a page. I have done that with faces before, and it usually just depends on how complex the face is and what I'm trying to do. Most of the time I work flat, but working at an angle is a great tool.
Okay, we have a couple more. Do you typically use bright white paper?
Uh, I think so. That's a really good question. The paper, I use this paper. I think it would probably be considered bright white. It is not an off-white paper. I haven't heard it specifically marketed as such.
And then there's a general question about whether commercial watercolor paints are mostly transparent or opaque. I know there's a combination, but please answer that for
Yes.
our.
Yeah, it totally depends. And this is the thing about the commercial watercolor paint world is it's not like it's highly regulated. So even one pigment name from one brand to another isn't necessarily going to be the same pigments or even really the same color. The pigments might have different properties. It might be a different shade. For instance, the phthalocyan blue that I'm using versus someone else's phthalocyan blue. One Payne's gray versus another Payne's gray tend to look pretty different. That doesn't quite answer your question, which is that there's a mix. So all watercolors should have a code on them or a little bit of information. With these, I just have light fastness and I have the pigment codes on here and what the vehicle is. Some pigments on the tube will say if it is transparent, if it's staining, if it's semi-transparent, if it's semi-opaque. There's a whole wide range. So you can, within any box of watercolor paints, you can find very transparent pigments as well as some that are quite opaque. I have some cobalt teal in here that I have freely used to cover mistakes before. Cobalt teal is a great semi-opaque paint. Does that more or less answer the question? I'm not sure I've quite
I think it does, yes. And I've got
understood.
one more if you have a
Mhm.
minute. What sort of pencil do you do the sketch in? B's or H's? And what's the white pencil that's next to you? And
Yes. Um, I think that this is what they're talking about. It is blue, but there are white parts to it. Please correct me if not. This is your average boring Bic HB number 2. I have 50 of these floating around my house. I like mechanical pencils. If I am creating a drawing, I like to use charcoal. I like to use soft graphite. I often use toned paper and like a white chalk as well. For me, if I'm drawing, I really want to get messy. I want to mix those pigments around. I want to get variations in shading. When I'm prepping a sketch for a watercolor portrait, I want none of those things. I only want to have very fine lines that show me exactly where the transitions are between shape, between boundary of shadow, where the eyes are, things like that. So I use a mechanical pencil for that because it tends to be pretty low residue and it's cheap and easy. I would not use a mechanical pencil for a fun drawing session. I generally only use them for making my undersketch. Uh, okay. Unless there's more questions, let's move on. I think I've sort of probably hammered this in enough. The basic approach is quite simple. It is make a gradient shape and put more gradient shapes on top of that once it dries. By layering transparent gradient shapes, I can build shadow. And that shadow is going to create contour. And that is how we build a face. Um, so that's what I'm going to be doing. Oh, but first I have to throw my brush at the paper. That's a really important step. I have a bad habit, particularly when I'm working around a bunch of cameras, of just flinging my brush right into my portrait. So I'm gonna pick out a shape, and right now I'm working from big to little. I'm working from light to dark, and more or less I'm working from fuzzy to fine. So I'm looking for the next biggest shape here, and when I look at this reference photo, I look at the big shadow on the side of my friend's face, and it's a fairly complex shadow. It comes all the way down, touches on one eye. It comes all the way down the side of the face, across the nose, through the mouth, across over the chin. I'm going to break that down a little bit so that I don't have to do it all at once. Um, Probably. We'll see. And I'm going to start off by mixing a little bit of all three of um, my main colors here. I would love to be the kind of artist who shows up for a demo with a clean palette, but I think honesty is probably more important in this case. I'm not the kind of person who ever has a clean palette. And I don't know that I ever will be. So that's what we got. I'm taking some red, I'm taking some blue. Predictably, I get a nice purpley color. And you ask, you just said that we should use pure tones. Why are you mixing colors now? That's a great question. For that initial layer, I use only pure tones. So I have, if you look here, you can see that there's a lot of secondary colors, but it's all pure tones. It's all pure phthalocyan, pure quinacridone gold, and pure quinacridone red. As I build up my layers, I tend to get closer and closer to mixing. As you can see, everything here is really, really bright and vibrant, and we don't need things to be quite that bright and vibrant by the time we're done. So, uh, one thing that I have noticed is that you can always make bright and vibrant more neutral and subtle, but you cannot make something that is neutral and subtle, with watercolor anyway, you cannot make that bright and vibrant again without painting over it with an opaque paint of some kind.
There is a question about how you choose the color patches that are on the skin.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. I look at the photo really closely. When I teach classes, we'll usually play a game I like to call Find the Color, where I'll put the reference photo up on a big screen and we'll all stand around it and squint at it. And the idea is to really look deep into the shadows, look deep into the highlights, really look at that and try not to see the person as a single skin tone ranging from pink or brown or really, really dark, all those normal human colors, try not to see them as a tan version or like a single color, but try to see where all those primary colors could come in. And so when I look at this photo, I see that there's yellow that's blending in with the pink, with the red. I see that there's greener areas where some blue would be. And then that's really what it comes down to, is I look at it closely and I see, where do I find yellow? Okay, where can I find red? Where can I find blue? And I let that guide me. I'm going to start off with just this kind of neutral shade, and I'm just going to use the neutral shade as my base for the gradient shape that I'm going to make. I'm going to start off pretty light. I'm going to start here at the top. Soul for a little while is going to look kind of like they're bald. And my personal apologies for that. But that is the cost of being painted in a portrait. So I'm gonna first totally paint over my line. That's fine. I'm going to bring this down here. I picked out this reference because it has hard edged shadows, and I find that to be a little easier to demonstrate with. I'm coming all the way up here, not quite going, just going to the lips. There's a trick here, which is that um, anywhere there's a line or a boundary, I can get away with making leaving a hard edge. And so I am going to split this shape, this whole shape up like so in a way that means that I don't have to worry like having a little bit of an edge show up in any of these areas isn't going to feel wrong. I'm going to bring this all the way down. Let's just go like that. And this is pretty arbitrary where I'm choosing to create my shape. Right now I'm still in that first phase of things. I'm creating the working area, the gradient shape. When I use my Mister bottle, it's probably gonna be easier to see this in the little video on the lower right. I'm holding it like a foot away from my painting, like so, and about a foot above, maybe 8 inches or so. And when I spritz, it sends out a cloud, like a cloud of perfume, and then it just kind of trickles, it rains down. This is how I refresh the moisture levels of a gradient shape without changing that shape at all. Just gonna pick that up. Let's go back up here. You may have experienced the fun of pointing your spritz bottle directly at the thing you're working on, and then suddenly everything is very wet. So my recommendation is try this misting technique if you haven't already. I need a different brush for this. Just for the border with the cone flower here, I'm just using a different brush, like so, so I can kind of get a more natural boundary. I want nothing on this shape to be drying yet, so I'm keeping a really close eye on it, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to re-wet any areas where I feel like it's drying. Yep, it's drying over there. Re-wet. I want to have set everything up so that I have this nice wet working area to make my gradient inside of, like so. And then I may spritz that a little bit. If I keep spritzing this, I can keep working in this area. And what I want to do is I've just made a shadow, and I could be done here, right? It does the job. It makes a dark area. But what I really want to do is I want to add more color into this shadow. Because shadows are full of color. They have warm areas, they have cool areas, they have lighter areas, they have darker areas. So I'm going to take a little bit. Now here's where the pure tones come back in. A little bit of that quinacridone red. And I'm trying to add more concentrated than what I have already. And I'm going to drop a little bit more red in here because I see that this edge of the shadow is warmer. I see that the shadow is warmer down here as well. And you see I'm just kind of dropping in. I'm trusting that the pigments are going to diffuse themselves out. And maybe right here as well, a little bit more red. Up on the face, I'm seeing that we have more red right here. As I drop in pigment, it mixes on my brush with the stuff I already have there. And so if I want to keep dropping in pure pigment, I need to wash my brush off and pick up a little bit more. And maybe here along this edge, like so, I would say. And there's some red in here, but we're not worried about the eye quite yet. Again, I don't want to have to wrangle this whole shape right now. The whole entire shadow. Okay. And I can always come back and I can add more red if I want. Gonna wash out my brush. But you can see how that already adds a lot of depth to the shadow. Now, anytime, this is my mantra for myself. Anytime I could make a line, why not make a shape? A shape is more interesting. Anytime I'm gonna make a shape, why not make a gradient? A gradient is also more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of the phthalo blue. A little bit of this stuff tends to go a really long way if you've ever used it before. And just drop a little bit of this in here. I've already got a lot of good green and blue tones going on underneath, but I see that there's even more green and blue down here. Every so often, I'm just dropping whatever I'm doing and I'm checking if anything is drying. I'm looking at it from the side so that I can see the angle, I can see the sheen on the paper, and then I come back to it. Sometimes it even helps to like set a timer, something that goes off every 2 minutes and reminds you to, oh, quick, check your paper. Is it drying off? Sometimes that's just the best way to make sure what needs to happen happens. Okay, so I've mixed a little bit more of the blue in there, and why not get a little bit of yellow as well, because there's this bright reflected light where that yellow coneflower is right here. It's reflecting some of its light right under Soul's chin, like that. And same on this side. And there's no reason to miss out on an opportunity to put in some cool reflected color. Okay, so that is one way to do a shadow. I might come back in here and I might soften some edges, or I might sort of scatter it a little bit. I want there to be a little more texture here, not so much a hard edge. I can also come in and I can soften the edge and I can blend it out. I'm not going to do that here. I think the hard edges are just fine. Um, and as I look at this, I've added more blue, I've added more yellow. I'm thinking that for balance's sake, I'd actually like a little bit more red up here at the top. And you can see right there, I'm not sure how obvious this is. The pigment that I added was a little bit too dilute. And so what it's doing is instead of just adding more pigment, it is lifting up the pigment that is currently trying to settle into the paper. And it's not a problem because I'm here to kind of poke it around a little bit. But that is a thing to note, is that if you add pigment that's too dilute, you've already got a lot of pigment like nicely settled in the paper. That water is just going to pick it up and float it around. Alrighty. I'll often also soften edges where I intend to extend a shape, like so. And I can just soften that edge, and now I don't need to worry about having that look weird later. I'm going to keep some hard edges right around where this highlight is on the chin. But for now, I'm going to move on. I'm looking at the time and I'm saying that we're not really going to finish this portrait. It was a great notion. I love that I'm optimistic like that. But I do think, hopefully, what I'm going to be able to show is just enough of how this technique can be applied with layers and layers and layers to in progressively smaller and smaller shapes to build up a really interesting portrait. All right, one other rule of using, let me soften that, of using gradients is while it's wet, don't work near it. So if I wanted to put in a shadow right here and I started adding more water, it's going to bleed into the rest of this wet working area, and I really need to let that dry right now. So I'm going to work all the way on the other side, and I'm going to start off the same way, pick up a little bit of my neutral mix of all of those pigments, and I'm just looking at the shapes here. Here's the freaky part. Don't panic. I'm painting over the eye because that's where the shadow is. Like so. There's a little bit of frisket here that I'll peel off shortly. And bring the shadow all the way down here. Being quite careful about the shape that I'm making. It's really important to start off with a strong sketch. You want to have all the information on the paper before you start painting, because generally it does not become more clear during the painting process. If anything, it becomes less clear. So I might miss that a little bit. But right now what I have is this new shape that I'm working in, and I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush. This is a Gray Matters. I pick up a lot of my stuff secondhand. So I won't say that this is the best brush because I picked it out of all the other brushes, so much as this was the brush that I got secondhand. I like it. It's a number 4. Jack Rickson for water media. Who knows? It's great for smaller areas. I'm going to do more or less the same thing that I just did. I'm going to pick up a little bit of red. I'm just moving through my colors, my trio of colors. And I'm going to drop in a little bit of red where I see there being some red right down in here. A little bit up here underneath the eyebrow. And then you guessed it, I'm moving on to a different color. It doesn't really matter what order I go in. That little bit of phthalo blue. Anytime I want the phthalo blue to not go too far, I just make sure that either it's pretty concentrated, if I want a concentrated spot, or that I just don't have too much paint, too much water on my brush. And that will help it from going all over the place. So we're getting some purpley shades happen here. And I'm trying not to mix it too much. I am sort of dabbing around with my brush, but I'm trying to just let it drop in and spread out. The mingling versus mixing matters most at the early stages in my experience. And as you go, it becomes natural to use more mixed pigments or to let them kind of mix them either on your palette or a little bit on the paper. Wow, that was probably really hard to see for a while. Okay. So I've got some red, I've got some blue in there. I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow because I see that gorgeous underlight right on the inside of the eye, underneath the um, eyebrow, and just by adding a bit of yellow in there, it sort of pushed some of the other pigments out of the way. So last thing I do, and I'll do more of this as I progress through the stages. I can now, if I want a dark spot, I can take a little bit of that Payne's gray, and I can really darken some areas where I feel like I need that. You'll have to forgive me. My voice is getting a little bit raspy. I have been teaching since about 1 p.m. today. Um, and I love it. It's great stuff, but my voice is crying uncle, I think. Okay. So that is one eye, and now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to decide, ooh, that feels dry enough that I can then work in this area here. So moving back to my slightly larger brush, I make the shape. I'm starting with that neutral blend of all three colors. And I'm making sure I know exactly where this is going. In this case, it's going over the whole eye. It is always good to do a little sanity check before you put your brush on the paper and just make sure you know where you intend to put that brush. I can't tell you how many times I've put the brush on the paper and said, oops, that wasn't where that was supposed to go. Okay, so now I've got my shape here, and I'm going to add, first I'm just going to add some depth to it so I can add that mix, that neutral mix, maybe right in here. I want it to be a little bit heavier. There we go. And then same deal. If this is starting to sound a little bit repetitive, it is. It is a fairly simplistic approach. And I'm not showing the whole thing here. I will say there's a lot of finishing steps. I used a lot of techniques on the rest of this portrait that were not strictly gradients. But I do want everyone to know that you can just layer your gradient shapes like this. If you get a handle on creating smooth gradients and you become familiar with how they work and what you need to do to make them do what you want them to do, then you can just layer them and you can create portraits or whatever you want this way. They are also very good for flowers in my experience. Okay, got some red in there, a little bit of blue. And a lot of the work and the practice comes from learning how to read the image and know what is needed where, learning how to recognize what colors, what were those fugitive colors that are hanging out on the face that you wouldn't necessarily immediately see. I'm softening this whole edge, and now you can see how these kind of just nicely blend in with one another. And let's do a bit of my yellow right in here, again, where we see that nice yellow being reflected up from the cone flowers. And yeah, we got a whole layer of shadows here. And I'm going to extend this same idea. Let's see if I can lift that a little bit. And let's see how I'm doing on time. I think that I have I have about 20 minutes left, so let's go.
You do.
Thank you. Time kind of disappears times like these. So let's move on now. I'm looking at the underside of the nose, and you can see that this shadow, like so, it's a pretty simple shape. Starts here, it comes down over the mouth, right down to here. Again, we're starting with our neutral mix. And let's see, I'm going to not worry about this quite yet. We're going to kind of move down, but I want to work some of the colors into the top part of this gradient first. So the thing that I notice most about this, the nose here, is the really warm, it's like beautiful warm red right here on the side. It is very, very red. This is where you get what's called subsurface scattering inside the skin, where the light hits the skin, and then that light kind of bounces around, and then the light that comes out and hits your eye has some of the colors of the skin itself. Just a thing about skin and skin tones is all skin is some combination of reflective and translucent. And it is, I think, very important to think about this when you're painting. You will see light that hits the skin and it transluces through. So often you'll see colors from the underlying structures, veins. Sometimes you'll see reds where the skin is thin. Lighter skin tends to be more translucent. Darker skin tends to be more reflective, but all skin is some combination of reflective and translucent. When you're looking at someone with really dark skin or looking at skin that is in a very reflective lighting scenario, then often you'll see more of the bounced colors from various objects around the subject. So like I'll see this kind of bounced light, this yellow that's in here and that's underneath the side of the face. That's all being bounced up from these cone flowers here. Anyway, I can go on about that for probably a little bit longer than I should. So let's get back to this. I'm adding that hot red in here right around the nose, and we're gonna get into the territory where maybe it looks a little bit like they're having a nosebleed, before we get the rest of the detail in. There's also some gold as well in here. When I add that more dilute pigment, I know I said always add more pigment that is more concentrated than what you already have on the paper, and that is entirely true until you want to start breaking those rules. And so a reason that I break that rule is because I want the pigment that I'm adding to actually push the other pigments around so that there is an area of gold right there, like kind of a more concentrated area. I'm not really sure how clear this is on my screen. That is a reason why I would break that rule, but it does need to be done carefully. Okay, I would say we're kind of getting into drying zone. The problem with me yapping while I paint is that it gets pretty hard to um, keep track of things. I'm going to add a little bit of the blue in here because I see these really gorgeous lavender tones in the shadow. I've had students ask about like how do you get a picture that has all these colors in it? Um, there's a couple answers to that. One of them is you can there's some photography tricks using reflected light, stuff like that, that can help to increase the interesting colors on a subject if you're doing your own photography, which I encourage everyone to do. But also, if you get yourself a photograph that doesn't have obvious colors in it, you can just make them up. The cops can't stop you. You can just make up colors and it becomes more of an expressive thing. So I do encourage that. I am often taking a color that I see a little hint of, and then I'm expanding on that. I'm kind of growing on that theme. Okay, I'm going to expand this out. Right now, this is still wet, so I'm going to actually just expand out my wet working area here, mostly for time's sake. and making sure I know where I'm supposed to put my brush. Right here, this shadow comes all the way down. It actually comes across the break in the lips, like so, and down. And now I add color to it. Some more red here, some more red up here at the top. Where these just barely meet, like that. There's this really interesting little highlight right at the top lip there. I'm probably going to end up softening that a little bit as I finish and refine this portrait, but for now I want to, it's always easier to take down the white areas later when you're sure you want to lose them, rather than removing them early in the process and then wishing that you had them back. Okay, so I'm using some pink and red here, but I'm also going to introduce a little bit of purple. It's a little bit too much water there. Because there's purpley tones in Soul's lips. And I'm actually only going to add a little bit here because I want to come back on a later layer. I'm starting to get into the danger zone here where we have a wet area close to a drying area, and I don't want to end up with undesirable bleeding. So I'm actually going to leave the mouth right about there on that side and add just a little itty bitty bit of my Payne's Gray to really darken this side of the mouth, like so. Something I might do as this dries, not while it's super wet, but soften the edge just a little bit, like that. It'd be totally fine to have hard edge shadows all over this portrait. It's kind of the theme, and it's the expectation I would say that I have set. But I have options. I'd like to have a mix of hard edges and soft edges. We have one last shadow down here. I think I'm actually just going to use the little brush for it. And there's a cool little underlight right here. I'm going to try to leave just a little streak, a pale streak, right where there's that little highlight on the chin. We'll see how effective that is. If I whiff it and I can't get it on this layer, I can always lift that later. Okay. And I'm blending these shadows in. This area is totally dry here. And you guessed it, I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing this whole time, adding a little bit more red here. And some more of my, it's not really quite blue, it's a pretty neutral dark. So more of that neutral dark right in here, just to deepen this shadow. Blend out those edges. I'm gonna have to keep an eye on these edges because they're gonna, the color, the water is gonna try to flow into these little edges here, and if I don't want them to be raggedy, I need to keep sweeping them up. A little bit of phthalo blue right in here. And that may be just enough for this shadow. I'm going to soften this edge even more, like so. Edges are another thing that you kind of have to decide in the moment if you want to soften that edge or leave it hard. But often I find most of the time people tend to err on the side of soften everything because the hard edge is kind of scary. They're not sure that they want to commit to that. And then they have no hard edges or things look kind of soft and muddy. So if that's something that resonates with you, I encourage you to try putting that hard edge down and just living with it, committing to it, even if it means that it wasn't exactly what you wanted to see happen. I think a really big part of watercolor, and one of the things that keeps me coming back to it, is the fact that I just sometimes have to accept what has happened. And that is it. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit underneath the eye here. And I think that's probably all we're going to have time for. I'm hoping that this is sort of enough of a demonstration that you can see how an additional layer on top of this to build out the dark detail around the eyes, to deepen the shadow right in here and right in here. Maybe even give Soul some hair, just a little bit as a treat. Will create a fully finished portrait. And then I will, of course, once I finish this, I'll post it so that you all can see.
That's great, Tess. If you could use the time to do as much as you can. And then we do have some questions, but I'll save those for the last 10 minutes.
Awesome. Great. Sounds like we still have another 10 minutes to go. So I love that. I'm going to lift a little bit of Frisket that I have right here. Number one rule of lifting Frisket, clean, dry finger, and the area is also clean, is also dry. So if you try to move Frisket somewhere where there's a puddle right next to you, you will just smear it. Ask me how I know. So you can see that now I have these little highlights right here. All right, maybe we can do like one eye too. That would be really satisfying. I'm going to do the under eye shadow first. This shadow's a little bit subtle. There's a couple parts to it. There's this little section right here. And also right underneath, like so. And this meets with that larger shadow here. And then first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to deepen this a little bit, just make sure I have enough pigment in there. Soften the edge. And a little bit more here. And then I'm going to drop in a bit of color. Right here, I mostly see a little bit of red. It's mostly a little bit warm, like so. Even more warmth up here on the shadow that's right underneath the orbit, that lower lid there. And why not? Little bit of blue as a treat. And I can let them kind of fade out, or I can kind of poke them a little bit. When I'm doing those big gradients, I really try to prevent myself from poking the pigment to where I want it to be. I try to let the diffusion handle that. As I move through this process and as I kind of get more particular about where things go, I'll be a little bit more fiddly with my brush. I'm going to pick up a really fine brush. I picked up this brush quite recently. I quite like it. It is a 20 Zen Royal and Lang nickel. I think it cost me $2. And it so far works great. I've been using it for really um, fine detail like eyelashes. And something that I see here is that you can see the upper lashes, but you can't really see the lower lashes. What you do see, which I think is really cool, is you see the shadow of the lashes. And so something I like to do is to paint the shadow of the lashes like so. And you see, I'm actually I'm dragging through the wet paint that I have here, because I want these shapes to all be connected. Um if these shapes, these shadow shapes don't connect, something won't quite read as a shadow. It'll read as like really weird kind of long spidery lashes. But if I can get them to connect like this, a bit more of this. And that means I have to do all of this while these areas are dry, then it reads as a cool shadow. And I quite like that. I'm going to make sure that I have enough darkness in here, just a little bit of the Payne's gray. And I'm dropping it into this corner of the eye, like so. When I do my own photography, and this is my photo, um, I often look for things like this, really bright overhead lighting with like the sunlight. You'll see really cool, delicate stuff like the the shadows of eyelashes, and I just love that stuff. I think it's so interesting. That's pretty much it for this area. I'm gonna have to move on to the next one because if I work in here, I'm just gonna flood it. Let's move back down to the mouth in my last 6 minutes and see what we get. So I'm gonna mix a little bit of my red and my blue. I'm gonna start off with a purple because I see these nice purple tones in Soul's Mouth. I don't always have to start with that neutral dark. It just is an easy way to show what's going on. Like so. And there's some wonderful depth in here. You see, I'm just, once everything dries, I can just make I can make a layer on top of my layers. So you can really keep going until you're happy, um, by layering your gradient shapes on top of each other until you have the shape and the color and the depth that you're looking for. Just trying to drop a little bit of Payne's gray in here to get a nice depth. And there we have the corner of a mouth. And actually, it's kind of messy. Oh, whatever. Paint outside the lines, why not? And on the other side, I'm going to do something really similar. Just this little bit of the Payne's gray. And this is generally the final step, or approaching the final step of most of my portraits is I've been moving from large to small and from light to dark. And so logically, I end up now making very small, very dark shapes. And that's where the final level of contrast comes in, and often that's actually the point in which the portrait actually starts to look anything like the person that you're painting. Okay. I'm trying to get a little bit of Payne's gray in here is what's going on, but I'm just every single time I'm not getting quite enough. Here we go. There we go. So let's move up. Same idea. We're going up to the nostrils. I'm starting off, I'm kind of, now I'm not, as I move smaller and darker, I care less and less about exactly what color I'm using. And this is why my palette is always messy. I'll often use just whatever dark mess on my palette seems to be the right shade. Let me adjust my camera a little bit. There we go. So up here, I can create some nice nostrils. This is a thing, if you get into portraits and you paint your friends, you're going to find out that you get unexpectedly intimate with your friends' nostrils. It's just a hazard of the job. Okay. Simple as that. A little bit of a shadow under here as well. Even though I'm making these small dark shapes, I'm trying not to have them be lines, and I'm trying not to have them be too dark. So a hard dark line on top of all of this really delicate stuff that I've set up here is going to stand out. It's going to drag a lot of attention to itself. And I'm really trying to walk a careful balance of color and value. So I need to make sure I don't go too dark too soon. And that's one of the reasons I often save things like the eyes for the last, because I want to make sure I've got all those midtones in before I start using the really dark details. Let's do just a little bit of that, just to see if I can make this eye kind of come to life. I'm using dark, using my tiny brush. Let's give Soul an iris. Starting off, creating a shape that's lighter than what I really intend on. And then I can always add pigment in there.
So you started off with your neutral mix again.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, my neutral mix, my neutral dark. I'm going to drop a little bit of this red in here. Why not? Inside corners of eyes tend to be pretty pink. And then for the iris, I can add a little bit of Payne's gray. There's a lot of tricks to making your irises look light-filled. Soul has very dark eyes, but there is a bit of a reflection in them. Right now, I'm just going for the depth. And then I can add This is a little bit premature, but I can add that little flick of the eyelashes in this way. It's probably kind of hard to see that. I'm not going to do that quite yet because I want to add that top lid and then we'll probably call it a night. So, like so. Starting with a dark neutral, but I never want just a boring dark line. I want it to have a light area, a dark area. I want color in it. That's much, much more interesting to me than just a dark, a dark zone. Okay, so I think this will take a little bit of work to get everything in line. I think I could probably just show how I can add a hint of eyelash or eyebrow like that. Short, the small brush, short strokes. But I think hopefully this gets the idea across. I think we'll
It's
call it there.
Yeah, beautiful. This is just fantastic. Such a colorful portrait and glowing. Just thank you so much. Lots of questions, so I'm gonna
Okay,
read
great.
those to you. Jane Coleman asks, do you let all these colors absorb into the paper, or do you dab something you find too wet, like with a cloth or paper towel?
It depends if I've made a mistake or not. I generally, if everything goes according to plan, I put down exactly the amount of pigment that I want and I let it sit and that's it. I walk away from it. Sometimes what happens, I'm doing damage control. I had too much water on my brush. There was too much pigment. Sometimes, like you saw with the eyelashes, I'll do something and I'll say, "Ooh, nah, I really didn't want to do that." And I can just dab up from there. I found dabbing to be pretty aggressive, so I try not to do too much of that.
Thank you, do you generally paint the background first, or was that only for this demo?
Again, that depends on the effect that I'm going for. Mostly it was for this demo because I was able to work on the background and I figured it, the more finished we got, the better it looked. Sometimes I will do the background first, especially if I want to do a wash that includes the subject. There are scenes where I see the subject being very sunk into their surroundings, very not at all separate from their surroundings, in which case I would rather that I have a sense of sameness between the subject and the background. So there are cases when I would simply do everything in a big wash, or I would do the background separately, or really there's no single answer. I hope that helps to explain the reasons why I would choose one or the other.
Thank you. Joy asks, how do you keep your frisket from creating a sharp hard edge?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Most of the time, it does create a sharp hard edge. I do want to say something about frisket. I meet a lot of people who really hate frisket, and I honestly think that is fair. I also hated it, and a thing that changed my life was this rubber brush. This is a Rosemary and Co. rubber tip soft. I'm answering a slightly different question than the one that you asked, but I will get to it. This is a rubber brush. It means that I don't ruin any brushes, and it's a much better applicator for frisket. I'm not actually going to demonstrate this right now. I recommend this just as a general note about frisket. How to prevent it from making hard edges? The answer is I don't. I usually go back and I'll soften those hard edges. So once I peel the frisket off, I will take a short angled brush. This is this is a Princeton. I got this brush probably 10 years ago. It's an angular shader. It's the kind you get in a pack of 10. And it has, has stuck with me all this time. So it's just a small angular shader. It has a stiff tip, and I'll put that in a little bit of clean water. And if I see an edge like that's a little too hard, where I had frisket right up here, I'll just gently lift right around here. And you got to do it pretty gently. And I'll have to say, if the surrounding pigment is really dark, this doesn't tend to work as well. It works best when you already have some like just light pigment there. Um, Usually for my method, because my white highlights are um, right next to another light area, I don't have any trouble just blending those edges in when necessary. And then sometimes you do want a hard edge. Sometimes, like if there's a little flick of light in someone's eye, um, I've left this right here as a hard edge because I just kind of like it. So there are ways or reasons I would say to leave a hard edge, but to answer your question, the frisket does leave a hard edge. I then lift it if I want to.
Great, thank you. Tracy's asking if you could share one of your finished portraits with us since we won't see this
Yeah,
painting right now in a finished
yeah,
state, please.
that's a great point. I have a bunch of my class demos on hand, and I'll just pick a couple of those out. I just finished this one with my class last week. This is my friend Jonah. I used really just the same collection of techniques here, more or less, to build up the layers and the colors on his skin. Here is, can you guys see this with the glare? That's not ideal.
Oh, so sweet.
Yeah, this is the kid of a friend. I can't get it out of its pajamas right now, so that's I'll just move that off to the side. This is another example of same basic idea. I've used like very soft gradients to show these transitions in color. You can see my work on my Instagram as well. It might be a little bit easier there. You can zoom in on stuff, and we'll share the links for that. Let's
Yes.
do one more because I was talking about this was a case where I felt like my subject was really at home in his background. I wanted there to be a lot of similar colors. And so the first wash of this, excluding the areas that I frisketed, was all done in one big wash, including all the backgrounds and all that stuff. So, okay,
Okay,
that seems like a
and
good amount.
Debbie Teeter is asking, when you make your neutral mix, do you use equal parts of the primaries or is it a different ratio?
Um, it You theoretically, I'm using equal parts. I'm totally eyeballing it. Generally, I'm going to be tinting that neutral mix in one direction or another. And all that really matters is it's a convenient way of getting a lot of those three pigments in all at once. So usually I'll start with two, I'll mix myself a purple, and then I'll add yellow until it looks right, until it looks brown and gray. Lots of different ways of doing it.
Very good. And Chris asks, do you leave the hard edges on the majority of the big shadow areas or go back and soften some of it later? I understand about the edge of the face, but leaving a hard edge on a plane of the face, say the inner cheek, which looks like it might be soft to me.
Yeah. So on this particular one, I'm leaving hard edges in areas where, like right here, that's totally a soft edge. I think that's what they're talking about. And I could have softened that. We're looking at a range from expressive to realistic, and I'm just kind of jabbing my finger at some point on there. If I was spending more time on this, and a lot of the work that I spend lots and lots of time on, I'm very, very particular about my edges. Edge control, I think, is one of the critical skills in watercolor. And in this case, I didn't really have the time for it, but I have also found that if you want to make a portrait that's really all hard edges, you can make a really cool portrait. It's going to look a little bit more stylized, more expressive, less realistic, but still pretty cool. Uh, you can see in this example that I've made lots of shapes here, lots of layers. Some of this was just um, the initial gradient to get those skin tones in, but then I made shapes on top, and many of those edges are very soft because this is a soft, squishy baby.
All right. And Evelyn asks, do you erase your pencil drawing or just paint over it?
I mostly just paint over it. Sometimes, I think like probably on this one, anytime there's a really light, delicate looking area, and I feel like my pencil line is disrupting the flow of the painting, I'll usually erase it a little bit. For the most part, I leave them right there. If someone has found my pencil drawings in my painting, they've gotten up close enough and they've found them, in my opinion, they deserve them. So,
And do you use a different palette for landscapes?
ooh. Yes, I find that this palette does not work super well for landscapes. I get like really, really vibrant trees. trees usually are not that vibrant. So I will use different colors. As I said, this is not the only palette. There are much subtler versions of this, but I find that these four to five, depending on what yellow you're using, are just really easy to learn this technique with. So I won't go over my landscape palette. It's really whatever I have in my box. I've been using indigo a lot lately.
Fun. Well, there are other comments that are thank yous and fabulous session. Thank you so much. Great presentation. And yes, someone commented that you'd be great to take a longer class from, and we absolutely want to have you put your
We switch to that.
little flyer up about that, please. And we will be sending a link to you guys. Tess is going to provide that your earlier, you said that you had a video from today's teaching that you did earlier today,
Yes.
and you'll send those links out, or you'll give them to Dan, and Dan will, our tech people will put
Let
those
me,
on the
right
link.
now, I'm going to copy and paste this link um, and put it in the chat.
Great.
This will take you to a specific time, like 20 minutes in. That cuts
Okay.
out some of the yapping that I did last night. I do want to warn you that this is a really casual stream with like mostly friends and people that I know. I probably use one or two bad words. Sorry. You can watch it on mute if you want. Let's see. I don't see a chat, but I do see the Q&A.
All there is a Q&A, but we are going to be sending a link to our presentation today for people, the recording, and then also you can email education@watercolorsocietyofOregon.com, and we can provide you with the link that way. We want you guys, I want Tess to put up her little class list. Are
I
you
think
getting that now?
yes, just a moment. I think what I'm going to do here is Patty Duncan, I'm going to take your comment that you left. Thank you. And I'm going to I'm going to put my YouTube link as an answer to that because
Oh,
that does seem to
great.
be the only way
It is.
that, that I can send this. So if you go to the Q&A and you go to answer, there's going to be a YouTube link. Feel free to click that, open that up. Okay.
Excellent.
And then let me pop up my class info right here.
Ah, excellent.
So if you do want to take more classes with me, I would love that. I have two workshops that are coming up right now. I have a portrait boot camp that's going to cover some of this stuff, but then really dive into it. We'll be doing at least two portraits with a similar approach. That's going to be in Bend. I have, I think, maybe 3 to 4 spots left in that workshop. So that's in Bend. That's April 18th and 19th. I have in November, quite a bit later this year, I have a 4-day workshop at Manuka, which is going to be like a really nice deep dive. It's called Portraits from the Ground Up. We are going to start with some of the foundational stuff that I think is going to be really important for working in my style, but then we're going to dive deep into not just the painting of portraits, but how do you do all the other stuff too? Your photography, your concept notebooks, all the other fun stuff. Down here, some stuff that I have going on right now. I do small group mentoring. I'm currently closed, but I'm opening up for my spring sessions. So if you are interested in working in a small group, these are usually groups of 5, between 4 to 6 people. You can pick your own group if you have a group of friends, or you can get placed in with a group. But it's just right now, it's been that we meet every 2 weeks. It's very self-directed. I give feedback, I give guidance, we talk about stuff, but it's very much a choose your own adventure. If you want to start right away and you want to get going on some video, I have pre-recorded tutorials, which are on my website. So if you look at the bottom here, you'll see I have tessmyers.com, which we'll put a link out. There should already be a link to that, I think, on the registration page for this. And you can find all of this class info there, as well as some pre-recorded tutorials. And then I'm often teaching in-person classes at the OAC, which was formerly known as the OSA in Portland. I think that's it. Join my newsletter if you want to have more information about this. And I do have a couple more workshops that are currently in planning phases, so keep an ear out.
So
That's
great.
it.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. We hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned. We're hoping to get some more offerings out. We're going to regroup, and please give us your feedback or follow-up questions to me at education@watercolorsocietyofOregon.com. Check out our website. If you're not a member, consider joining. We have great relationships and are growing in our art practices, and so we'd love to have you. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.